thank you everybody who has shown up in person for braving the cold, and I hear that there's now snow out there too. And thanks to those of you who are zooming in. I just want to give a little shout out and I have a brother, I think, who's zooming in from Toronto. So anyway, we're quite a broad-ranging group today. So I wanted to talk about a topic that I really love, and it's gardening. It's actually, you'll notice there's an ER after the wild there, so it's gardening on the wilder side, because I'm not suggesting that we all turn our yards into vast wildnesses, but that we just look to maybe make them a little bit wilder. And you know, I have a feeling that a lot of people here tonight, maybe listening in, are already on board with that. So I probably don't need to convince you too much. But my alternative title for it is "In Wildness is the Preservation of the World." Now, I suspect many of you will recognize that phrase. Anybody want to throw out who said that or wrote that? Thoreau? Thoreau, got it, yes. I wish I had said that, but no, in fact it was Thoreau. And he was, of course, a wise man, and he loved nature. It was important to him. You know, human culture was important to him as well. But he really felt to be, you know, fully alive and complete. Connection with nature was really important. I want to focus on the word wildness. We'll come back to that in a second, because he did say wildness, not wilderness, and sometimes it's misquoted, and then sometimes people say in wilderness is the preservation of the world. Nothing wrong with wilderness at all, but they're not necessarily the same thing. And I'm not going to talk a lot about Thoreau tonight. I'm not an expert by any means, and this isn't to talk about him, but he had some really great stuff to say. We have a few books on the side that the library has. And I just wanted to give you a little wider context for that phrase from the beginning, "And wildness is the preservation of the world." You kind of saw wildness, I think it evolved over time, but it wasn't wilderness. And it was often a sense of something within as well as without. As he said here, when he was talking about the West, he was actually using that almost in terms to describe wildness. So it's really more of a condition or a state, and one that he firmly believes in connecting with. And in fact, he also felt that people should have a part of themselves that was uncultivated and wild, as you can see in this phrase here. And I really like this last little quote that I'm going to show up from him, which is to say that to think that wildness is only in the distance is not necessarily a good thing. That as he says, I shall never find in the wilds of Labrador any greater wildness than in some recess in Concord, which is of course where we live. So I want to sort of pick up on that idea. And just to say that, you know, wildness, wilderness, not the same thing. So what wilderness is more like a place, and of course it's characterized by wildness. But wildness is more of a state or a condition, maybe even an intention. And of course wilderness is made up of wildness, it's a feature of it. But I think to think of wilderness, we often think of vastness. And when we think about vast wilderness, we may think, well, what can we do about that? It's so big and it's out there and it's other. I'd like to sort of encourage you to think about those little recesses, not just in Concord, but in your own gardens as wildnesses. And I've often talked about, and I'm sure you've heard this term rewilding. It's quite popular now. And I kind of moved away from it a bit. Not that I don't think it's wonderful and that I don't agree with it. I think it might possibly throw people off a little bit, and maybe it's a little daunting. There's a lot of, the guy that kind of coined this world was someone named David Foreman, who founded Earth First and a bunch of other organizations. And the last sort of two big ones that he founded were related to the idea of rewilding. And they're talking about rewilding on a really massive scale. and we're talking about, introducing apex predators and kind of really trying to restore large stretches of property to the wild. So that's not really what we're talking. I'm not suggesting that you restore apex predators to your yards here. We're just talking more about this little idea. And you may actually have them already, so nothing we can do about that. Oh, well, actually, it's not such a bad thing, is it? As long as your dogs and cats aren't outside.
Kids.
And kids, yes, let's not forget about those. Instead, I want to talk about this little term that I came across, the idea of little wildnesses. I just really fell in love with that term. There's a fellow who wrote a book, actually, I think I brought it here. Yes, Daniel Botkin, No Man's Garden. And he uses this term, little wildnesses, when he is talking about Thoreau in some cases. And I didn't see it in so many words in Thoreau, but I think it's a lovely idea. And it's that little idea that in little places we can have wildness, and that those little wildnesses, this is like Doug, I'm sure most of you have heard of Doug Ptolemy, who has written a number of books about ecology and pollinators, and he's got the idea of homegrown national parks, where we all actually have our own little national park in the backyard. The pollinator pathway, same sort of idea, that we all do our little bit to cultivate things that are good, not just for ourselves, but for the world and wildlife in it. So, in other words, I was trying to work down this. When I went in to try to reduce this and edit it down, it got longer and longer. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we're talking about little wildnesses and wilding, we're not really talking about trying to return your land to a state that it was previously in. You can't do that. It's just not going to happen. Instead, I'm talking about creating the conditions, like wildness is a set of conditions, qualities, that will actually allow, and then the other word that's important here is processes. So you're enabling a lot of those natural processes to start to retake their place, because we've messed with a lot of those natural processes, and when you start pulling one thread out and another thread, then everything seems to go out of whack, or does go out of whack. So I'm talking about restoring a lot of the natural processes by bringing in native plants. They'll in turn bring insects and other wildlife, amphibians, birds, lots of wildlife. And then I also don't want to forget about what's going on under our feet, because I think only now many of us are just becoming really aware of how much life there is beneath our feet. You look outside right now and it's tempting to think that everything is, if not dead, frozen and still and quiet, but there's a lot going on under there. All those plants are getting ready to do their stuff in the spring, the microbes are going, and that's a really important part of the natural world, so I definitely wanted to include that. Okay, this is sort of a hokey picture, but the idea here is, slight digression. Before I retired, which I hate that word, if anybody knows me, they probably heard me go on about that, because I feel like I emerged rather than retired. Anyway, before I retired, I ran something called the Center for Behavioral Finance that was part of Allianz Global Investors in New York. And although I am not a behavioral economist myself, I had the great pleasure of working with some really leading ones, including a Nobel Prize winner. And I learned a lot from them about lots of things to do with life and decision making. And one of the things I learned was about the idea of reframing and frames and looking at life through different lenses. That we all tend to look through a set of lenses and don't necessarily change them up very much. And that we also, to make decisions, fall back on things we call heuristics or little rules of thumb. It makes it easier to make decisions, we've got to do it, but sometimes we should maybe examine those rules of thumb and see if they're really standing us in good stead. So why am I talking about that? Because this picture, no, I'm not going to talk about interior design, and there's nothing wrong with this picture. It's certainly not the way my living room looks like. I think my husband Michael would agree with that. But it's really tidy and everything's in place. There's nothing wrong with that. It is interesting that you know, they've introduced elements of wild. They're the monstera, and I think that's protea and orchids. But the point of it is that here's a house. We look at our houses and our rooms and everything. We want them to be tidy and orderly and spick and span, and no dust in the corners, no cat fur on our Chesterfields. I'm looking at Maria there. But the problem is that I think we tend to then look at our yards through a similar lens. And okay, I think this actually is probably AI adjusted, so it's maybe a little extreme. But when you look at that picture, there isn't a whole lot of wild stuff in there. You know, you've got your green carpet perfection, you've got all of the little balls and lots of mulch, and everything's, you know, a lot of straight edges, and everything's really tidy. So, not to belittle it, but there's not really much opportunity for wildlife in there, for life, for biodiversity. That is not a very biodiverse yard. So I'd like to encourage all of us to think a little differently and to put a little different lens on it. And I just a little set of three little slides here that I took from a book called The Book of Wilding, A Practical Guide to Rewilding Big and Small. And it's a really good book. It's actually written by an English woman who has a huge estate in West Sussex that they've rewilded on the major scale. And that book is really interesting. It's called Wilding. But this one was an attempt to sort of apply those learnings to smaller spaces. So this is what they're suggesting is sort of your typical yard, conventional garden. You know, it even has the leaf blower there just to sort of really make the point, and it looks like the pesticide application there, and straight lines, and you've got your little bushes and lots of mulch, and then just sort of bare walls, although they are made of wood. This they're suggesting is a little more like a nature-friendly garden. You can see they've taken away the pesticides and the blowers, for one thing. We've got some lawn because, look, kids want to play. We all want to have a bit of lawn, maybe. There's pathways there. There's water. You can see that the fence has now been overgrown by a hedge, so lots of places for wildlife, birds and other wildlife there. So that's what they're suggesting is a nature-friendly garden. And this takes it a little step beyond, and they suggest this might be what you would consider a rewilded garden. And as you can see, there's still some pathways, but they've sort of disappeared a little bit. Things are definitely a little messier, if you will. As for me, I would say, I don't know what you would say, Michael, but our yard is probably somewhere between here and here, and when I'm really a little lazy and it's really hot out, it's definitely more like this, and maybe even a little beyond. That's the backyard, though. The front yard, we keep a little more spick and span. Well, maybe not spick and span, but a little bit more orderly, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's just to give you a little prompt there to think about how yards might be. And the other thing is, I'm not suggesting that you have to have, that your yard should be this or that. Think about what it is that you want out of your yard, and we'll get to this now, in fact. Things like how much time do you have to put into your yard? Because even when you're rewilding, although you're going to have need to spend much less time managing it, it's going to take some time and effort. There's going to take some money. If you want instant gratification, you might be a little bit disappointed, although there are ways like sowing annuals, native annuals, to get a faster return initially. But you really want to think about all of these things before you take on a project like this to bring a little bit of wildness to your yard. And you finding a good balance that works for you is important. And I'm going to go through 10 rules of thumb here that I hope to help you make some decisions and think about your yards. Just before I do that quickly, I want to just sort of pose the question, why do we want to rewild? I guess that question could be like, why are you here tonight? Why should we do it? Does anybody want to throw something out there?
Insects.
Makes sense?
Incense.
Incense.
Insects.
Insects. Incense. Okay, now I can hear. Yes, that's a good one. And you know what? I don't know that there's a wrong answer here. There's lots of possible answers. Anybody else?
It's more beautiful, I think. You know, meadows, but it takes a lot of. You and I talked about.
Yeah.
I wanted to turn my backyard into a meadow, and if you don't know what you're doing, it it ends up looking like a mess.
All right.
You know, it takes years to create a beautiful meadow, but it's so to my eyes, it's so much more beautiful and interesting than a green lawn. What is that?
Yeah. Exactly. I won't put everybody on the spot. There's lots of reasons to want to rewild. And Marjorie is right in some ways about it does require some patience, but there are ways to get somewhere and have an impact quickly. And one of those things, as you'll see, I'm going to suggest is to start small, because even starting small is a big, big step. There's lots of things like helping pollinators, and there's a lot of other insects out there, as you know, not just pollinators, and a lot of those insects are really beneficial. So there's wildlife, birds, this also, gardening or tending your yard this way reduces water usage a lot, can help with things like stormwater runoff, which really helps the watershed. Connecting with nature, it is less labor intensive. I'm not saying there's no labor involved, but it is less so. So all of the things, you need to think about what it is you're doing it for. It might be a combination of things, and those, once you sort of decided, yeah, this is why I want it, that's going to affect a lot of the decisions you make, like some of the kinds of plants that you grow, maybe the design, lots of other things. So definitely start with giving that a thought. Why do I want to do this? So now I'm going to go through these 10 wilding rules of thumb. So these are kind of, I mentioned earlier that behavioral economics, this idea that we fall back on rules of thumb to make decisions. So I'm hoping that maybe we can trade out some of the rules of thumb that we're relying on now and instead sort of revert to these. By the way, I am going to try to stop in time for some questions, but if you've got a question that you just really want to ask right away, please do. If it seems like one that might take a bit longer to answer, then I'll just say let's get back to that at the end, and then it'll be up to you to remember it, because I probably won't remember. But again, if there's a quick question as we're going along, please feel free to just to shout it out. The first thing is to start small. Actually, no, that's not the first thing. The first thing is to get know your neighbors, which is really the very most important thing before you do that, starting small. Because you need to know what's going on around your yard, because your yard is within it, it's part of a community, and I think it's like the lens looking at that, your property as a contained space that's not connected to everything else around it. We're part of this whole community of the floral life and wildlife out there. And just because we have fences and ends of our property doesn't actually mean that that's how the natural world approaches it. So think of yourself as being part of a community and wanting to be a good member of the community. Look around and see what's growing in your yard already. Maybe it's something that's been planted, maybe it's something that's come in on its own. Things that come in on their own are all invasive. Some of them are pretty cool native plants. Just look around. It's sort of almost like a mindfulness exercise. Get to notice what's there already. That'll also help you decide what kind of plants would be great for you to put in your yard, because you'll get a sense of what kind of plants will thrive that want to be where where the conditions of your yard will make them comfortable and welcome. You know, realize too that there's a seed bank out there, and there's, you know, the soil is full of all kinds of seeds, and if we leave it uncovered, it's going to mean we're going to have a lot of unexpected visitors, and some of them will be great and some of them won't. And there's ways around mulch to deal with that, which we'll get to in a little bit. And who visits? So, you know, we all probably get visitors like deer. If you have a lot of deer that come to your yard, you probably really do want to think about plants that deer like less, because there are very few plants that deer won't eat, as you probably all know, when they're hungry. I think they've tried almost everything in our yard. So what you notice, take note of, and it's valuable information. And then remember, it doesn't just affect your yard, but it actually does affect everything around you too. So you're part of the community. And just to reinforce that point, I don't know if you know Aldo Leopold. He was a wildlife ecologist, a writer, philosopher, really great book, A Sand County Almanac, and he's just reiterating that point. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. Now we're on to the start small point. Do be aware that, you know, just deciding that you're going to turn a whole yard into a wild space, you may find really quickly that you've taken on more than you can chew, because it will require, especially in the early going, it's going to require some work. And you may love a lawn, and I'm not suggesting you can't have lawns or you shouldn't have lawns, and maybe you can cut it in half or in a quarter or so. You know, and again, just notice, treat it as a sort of experiment, and see what comes in. As I said in the previous slide, what's coming in, what's native, what's invasive. Take note of which plants maybe the birds like the best or some of the insects like best. You know, pay attention to where plants thrive and where and when they don't. I have an asterisk there because we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. So there's lots to learn, and it's a good idea to start small, because the fear is, as Marjorie was saying before, if you take on too much and all you see is that it's so much work and it's messy and I don't like it, more likely that you're going to give up on it. And I think one of the reservations that a lot of people have with this idea of having a wilder yard is that it's messy, but it doesn't have to be. There's things that we can do to keep it looking tidier, not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors, because we all are part of a community ourselves of people, and we want our yards to look good to them too. I know we don't all have exactly the same aesthetic, but there are things we can do to make it look more palatable for our neighbors too. This is a really big one. Go chemical free. If you really want to have a more biodiverse yard, this is a really important step to take. You know, forget about the pesticides and fertilizers. There may be some exceptions to this, and there are to most of the things I'm going to say tonight. But this is probably one of the biggest steps that you can take. Another important thing, it's not just you applying pesticides and fertilizers. You may or may not know that many of the growers apply pesticides, not just to the plants, but to seeds as well. And those are systemic chemicals called neonicotinoids, neonics for short. And they stay in the plant, they can stay in the plant for months or years. They get into the water, they get into the soil, they last longer there. They cause neurological damage and other damage to insects and other wildlife. I won't go into a lot of detail on it, but I do suggest both Pollinator Pathway, Norwalk River Watershed Association, Connecticut Audubon, other groups were lobbying to get some changes to Connecticut law on this, and they were successful last year to to some extent, but there's a long way to go. And remember, there's not just pollinating insects. If you encourage more insects in your yard by planting the right plants, a lot of those insects are actually going to do a lot of the work for you. As the quote says, if you exercise a little patience, nature will often sort out the problem itself. This is one of our best team members in a way for getting rid of, or not rid of, or helping us manage pests. Frogs can eat, that's a green frog, and they can eat up to like 100 insects a night. Think of that over the season. Think of that if you've got 100 frogs, which you might have in your yard, or even 10. They eat things like slugs, which I have a whole other talk I could talk about slugs and why they are actually not so bad, but we won't go on about that today. I actually like slugs quite a bit, but anyway, frogs eat a lot of the pests in our yard. So if you've got a yard that encourages frogs, and by the way, not all frogs are always in the water. A lot of our native frogs are spending a lot of time in the grass, like the wood frogs and the pickerel frogs, some of the green frogs to some extent. So anyway, frogs, encourage frogs. Hoverfly, this is a syrphid fly, also known as a flower fly. It looks a bit like a bee, but it's not. This little fly, he's a great pollinator, but his eggs become, I hate to say it, but maggots. They're little maggots, tiny, nice little maggots. And they lay them near aphid colonies, and they eat a lot of aphids. And that's just one example of a beneficial insect. This fellow, anybody know what that big hairy fellow is? It is a lady beetle or ladybug larva. And it actually, I believe, is one of our native ladybugs, the 9-spotted one. I won't go on about the non-native ones, which we don't want to encourage so much. But those guys are huge aphid eaters. This larva will eat hundreds of them before it moves into the adult stage. And these little guys here are called aphid mummies. They are actually the result of another parasitic insect that eats aphids. That's the aphid mummy wasp. I don't know its scientific name. So there's lots of guys out there who are just waiting to help manage the pest problem in your yard. If you use a pesticide, you're going to kill them too. Not always, but many of these broad ranging pesticides you will. Uli Lorimer, one of his books, he's actually got a great book called The Native Plant Primer. As he says here, it's a bit ironic if you are buying native plants because you want to encourage and feed the pollinators that you choose ones that actually have been treated with a pesticide that's going to kill them or make them sick. So, go to the nursery and ask. The more people that ask that question, the more nurseries are to become aware that people care about this kind of thing. Resist the urge to lawnscape, I'm calling it. Again, I'm not saying to get rid of the lawn entirely. You might want to consider that if that's what you like. But think about, instead of a lawn, a much more biodiverse yard, and maybe set aside these areas for little wildnesses. If you do keep part of the lawn, fine. But you can do things like mow higher, so that you mow less often. So you're going to be using less gas if you have a gas-powered mower. More life will live in it. You can top dress with a little bit of compost that gets the grass growing, and you don't have to use fertilizers. Cut back on watering. When you water more. Water less often and water more deeply, because then you're going to encourage the roots to be deeper, and that's better. And there are actually if you really want a lawn, there are mixes that you can use that are low or no mow, and those tend to be cool season grasses, so they'll grow in the spring more and in the fall, and not so much in the summer, so you don't have to mow as much anyway. So if you'd like a lawn, you might want to think about something like that. And another guy, if you ever get a chance to hear him speak, Dan Jaffe Wilder, he is great. He's really funny, really knowledgeable. He is, I think it's the Director of Applied Horticology at the Norcross Wildlife Sanctuary, which is on the line between Connecticut and Massachusetts. He does a great talk called Kill Your Lawns, but lots of others too. So if you ever get a chance, hear him speak. But he, as he says, the best way to build resiliency into your yard, which we all really want to do given climate change, is to build diversity into it. And a lawn's not going to do that for you. Even better than a lawn or just a straight grass lawn is to use some of these, and there are many others, ground covers, or these are really low. There are ground covers, that term is used for plants that can be taller, but these are ones that you can really use that are steppable. And I'm not going to go into detail about these now, but there's some great options there. And this background is actually the native strawberry plant, which is Fragaria virginiana, and it's beautiful, and in the fall it becomes these beautiful colors, and it's a great option to either replace some of your lawn or mix into it. All of these are. So I'm going to suggest, doing a bit of that. Either set an area aside to do that or mix some of it into your lawn, and don't be quite as focused on having something that looks like a green carpet. Plant lots of natives. Everybody hears that now. And of course, one of the main reasons is that we're building habitat. We're building habitat for all kinds of wildlife creatures, insects. And Doug Tellamy says, sort of rule of thumb is make 70% of your yard. Aim for this. Again, not everyone's going to make it, and you may not want to. Make 70% of your yard, the biomass of your yard, native. So that doesn't mean that 70% of all your plants should be native. It means the biomass, which is including trees, and because oaks are some of the best native plants we have. But that's an aim. You don't have to achieve it. It's just the ideal state, I suppose. I'm not saying and he's not saying to tear out every single non-native plant. But if you can, when in doubt, or when you can, buy a native. And think not just about the meadow, but the edges, the woodlands and the wetlands in your area. And multiple layers are a really good thing, because different insects and animals live in different layers of your landscape. If anyone here is a birder, you know that birds, you can often know what bird you might be seeing, because you know that they are ones that like the shrubs rather than the trees. So layer it up. Don't just have one sort of layer. This slide is a bit busy, but it's it's quite interesting. It makes the point there about the importance of biodiverse native plants and the degree to which that will attract more wildlife. This is from the Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change group. They have a lot of really great information online, pamphlets that you can download and presentations. And that just gives you an idea of how much more powerful a yard with native plants is in terms of protecting and attracting wildlife. So connected to native plants, and so when we talk about native plants, we want to look for plants that are from our area, our region. So there may be a plant that's native to the United States, but it's native to California. That's probably not going to work here. So there is the regional appropriateness of a plant, but there's also, of course, within everybody's property, and we have different little micro habitats. And so it's really important to think about what your yard is like. How dry is it? Do you have wetland? Does it get, do you have areas that are wet in the spring and then dry out? Are there areas that are really sort of chalky or sandy? So this is a saying that's what gardeners have been saying for years: right plant, right place. And the idea is to match the plant to the habitat, not buy plants and think, okay, now I'm going to amend the soil to death so that I can make this plant work here. This is going out on a limb a bit, or not a limb a bit, pushing the envelope a bit, but don't amend your soil. Okay, there's a caveat there. I mean, if you're growing vegetables and annuals, you're probably going to want to amend the soil. And if you do amend the soil, think about putting it on top and not digging into the soil, disturbing all of that network of life that's under there. And of course, look for natural, organic amendments, and you can get most of those from your own yard in the form of leaf matter and other plant debris. And just a reminder that that plants often are bothered by pests and infestations when they're stressed. So they might be getting too much water or not enough water, and then literally the pests are attracted to that, and the plants are more likely to suffer from pest infestations. So plant it to suit your conditions, and then some of these natural predators will do the work for you. Here we've got a green lacewing, and above is its larva, and you can see it's already, that larva is just about to eat that aphid. So that's a good beneficial plant to have. Just really quickly go through this part of it. The climate's changing, so not only do we need to think about plants that do well here now, but are they going to do well in 10, 20, 30 years? That's a big thing, so I'm throwing a lot of information at you tonight. But just bear in mind that this is saying that the climate of Massachusetts, because this was done in Massachusetts, in less than 100 years, if the emissions remain high as they are now, it's going to have a climate that's more like South Carolina. So, climate's changing fast, and when you buy plants, and as everyone may know, hardiness zones are shifting. Ours just shifted. Well, actually, that's not quite true. I thought ours had shifted, but my area is actually still in 6B, but many of you may be in 7A now, which is warmer. So, won't go into this in detail now, but things have already shifted, and every time they put out a new, this is where you can go to get your the information about, you can plug in your area code to find out what zone you're in. And as the climate changes, there are ways, and it is changing, there's ways to deal with that, to make your yard more resilient. To plant natives to begin with, they've already evolved in these conditions that are probably better set to deal with them as they change. But when you're looking for plants, maybe choose native ones that are in the mid to northern part of their range, rather than ones that are northern plants that are just barely comfortable here. Because if things are going to get warmer, we want to have plants that can accommodate that changing temperature. Local populations are good, and probably when you're ordering plants, might probably make sense not to order from more northern suppliers, because they're going to be growing plants that have gotten used to thriving in conditions that are cooler than ours. So just a little thing to keep in mind. This is a big one, really, really important. I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is a whole other talk, but invasive plants are a huge threat. They're not good for resilient gardens. They're not good for wildlife. They take over and suppress native plants, a whole bunch of things that aren't so good. Great website there called, it's the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group, SIPWOG, UConn.edu. They have all kinds of information there about invasive plants, and those are the top 10, which are probably the worst ones, like Japanese knotweed and bittersweet and barberry. It's Winky One, this isn't even there, is it? So anyways, invasive is really important. You need to try to manage those to the best you can, get familiar with them and remove them from your yard. Embrace a little chaos and imperfection. That slide, remember, that I showed you of a yard having to be exactly straight and everything in its place. Well, just maybe look at that through a slightly different lens. You know, in the winter, you know, don't do your yard cleanup in the fall. For the most part, let your plants stay. Stalks are standing. Seed heads are there for all the birds and other creatures that some of them who will overwinter in the stems of plants. Leave little brush piles in your yard. Leave the leaves, that's a big thing. You will probably want to move them off of your lawn, but you can move them into your garden beds. They're the best fertilizer it falls from the trees every fall is our plants. Our leaves from the trees. And then sort of think about when you look at a plant and its leaves are eaten, maybe isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it's a sign that your yard is actually, you know, welcoming wildlife. For example, this cute little guy, does everybody see him as cute? Maybe you need to reframe the way you look at little wiggly thing. That is actually a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar.
Wow.
And it is on a Dutchman's pipeline plant. And the minute I put those plants in my yard, they showed up. And I don't know if I'd actually seen a pipeline swallowtail in my yard before. I have seen similar ones like the spice bush and the black. Anyway, that's a pretty neat creature to have in your yard. So, you know, lighten up a little bit on maybe being too upset by the little holes that are in your yard. That fellow is a milkweed tussock moth caterpillar. He likes to eat milkweed. Doesn't bother the monarch caterpillars at all. And again, I did go on a little bit about the snail thing, or the slug thing. The Royal Horticultural Society a few years ago has proclaimed that slugs and some other pests are no longer garden pests, that they have an important role to fill. So if they say it, you maybe should pay attention, but that's another topic. Water for wildlife. Won't dwell on this, but instead of water for your lawn, maybe use what extra water you use to attract wildlife. Those frogs, again, are going to eat a lot of the things that are going to be pests in your yard. It attracts birds, all kinds of other wildlife. And certainly if you have a wetland or a stream in your yard, that's something that you want to cherish and protect, and really know that anything you do on your property is going to go into that watershed, into the stream, into the wetlands that might be on it, and then feed ultimately into the sound. So water for wildlife, not for lawns. And then lastly, I'm just going to show you a few quick pictures. We talk about I can't remember the name of the woman that developed this term several years ago, and she calls them cues to care. And it's the way to show people or demonstrate that this wild-ish yard that you have is intentional, and that it's not just a big mess. And so there's ways of doing that, and these are just a few. You know, you put pathways, and which something that I've done, you'll see in a minute, in between the plants and the native plants that are going. You put pathways, you make the edges a little more manicured. You clip the hedges a little bit, or some of them. They don't all have to be little balls or bombs. Shorter plants that are along the pathways. If you put garden ornaments, if you like that kind of thing. And you know, one of the things you can do is put signs up, and I'll show you a couple examples in a minute that show that you're concerned about wildlife. An article I read recently called them tidy wildlands. It's to make sure that people see that your property is a tidy wildland. This is just to reinforce that point, you know, the mowing paths, having the edges that are lower so that you're getting some, it makes it look a lot neater. I do not always follow this myself, but I shouldn't I? Yes, I know I'm running out of time, okay. Just this guy, I just want to mention Larry Weiner, great, has written a number of books, and he does courses on bringing native and ecological landscaping he's actually been doing these courses and been doing this, I think, since the 70s. And he's got some really great information, and his not only does he have a business, but he has this New Directions in the American Landscape that offers a lot of courses if you're interested. This is what I was talking about, more cues to care. This line from the Xerces Society, a group that started locally, the Pollinator Pathway, which is fabulous. You put those up and people will see that you are doing this intentionally. I would say that mulch is not what I would consider a cue to care. The fellows that I mentioned, Dan Jaffe Wilder, was listening to a talk of his recently, and he said, how many people get into gardening for the love of mulch? Well, probably not too many, but some of the gardens you might look at might suggest that they do, because somehow we've evolved this way of looking at gardens as having big mulch spreads of mulch with plants here and there with lots of space in between them. And the thing is that a lot of plants, once they've gotten established, especially, will do a lot of the work that we use mulch for, just suppressing weeds and retaining moisture and that kind of thing. So let's kind of say no to mulch, or at least no to as much mulch as we've been using. And just as I conclude, I'm just going to show you a few pictures, mostly from my yard, with just a few pointers. There's different ways to go about rewilding or making little wildnesses in your yard. You could start by, and not to say you shouldn't do this, it's more work. I am too lazy to have taken the approach I'm about to mention, which is have all of the lawn removed, and then you can do that in different ways and then start to reseed, and it takes some time. It's beautiful. But because I'm kind of lazy, what I did was well, first of all, I took a course, and it was required. I had to do a plan for my backyard. And of course, I did the plan, and I paid attention to it for the first few months, and then I stopped looking at it, and I completely went off it. So the plan's a great idea, but I cannot, in all honesty, say that I created the plan and then stuck to it. But I did do things in which I've kept, like the pathways and a number of the plants I continue to use. So a plan is a great idea, but you don't have to do that. For me, what I did was, for a few years, we let the lawn in the backyard go, meaning that we'd stopped putting fertilizer and pesticide on it. Violets started showing up, wild violets. A lot of people hate them, but they are beautiful. What I find too is a lot of the deer and the hedgehogs and things will actually eat the violets and maybe eat some of the other things in the yard, a bit less, not entirely. Other natives appeared, like fleabane, goldenrods. These are things that just came in on their own. I didn't add them, so it was really interesting to see them. And all of those ones that just came on their own are fairly rambunctious or aggressive plants, and so you need to put them in the right place, meaning in a sort of native garden, maybe not necessarily in a carefully tended border. This is the back of my yard. That square patch you'll see in a minute was actually the foundation for a little shed that I put in. But this was lawn and had started to go. There's lots of violets there, some other things. Within about, I think this is only a year, maybe two later, you've got the native violets there. There's, by the way, native violets come in different colors. They kind of duke it out in our yard. One year we have more purple ones, and the next year we'll have more white ones. Then after that, that was just this year, and that's looking at the yard from sort of the same angle. All of those, so I have the yard that is this sort of meadow area is pretty much all native. There were a few exceptions, but that's what it looks like at this point, and that used to all be lawn. And then you do provide resist over time. You, for example, if you want to sow some seed, sowing seed isn't such a great idea if you are leaving the lawn and starting a native meadow out of that. If you leave what's there, the seed that you put down is going to struggle a lot more and compete with what's already there. It's not that you can't do it, but it won't be as successful as taking other approaches, like allowing some of the natives to come in, putting in plugs, You might want to consider putting the plugs in little drifts so that looks a little more intentional and planned. I have put some larger container plants in to get a bit more of a quick pop. And don't forget the grasses, because they're really important in native landscapes. The other thing too about native landscapes is that for the most part, after the first year or so, you really don't need to water. Sometimes they'll flag, but that's what they do in the wild. I'd like to think of it as management, not maintenance, because it's nature. Everything's changing. You know, a garden, a native garden especially, changes from month to month, year to year. You're not trying to maintain it, you're trying to manage the way that it grows to benefit you and to have a garden that you really love. There's lots of other things you can do if you want to, but you really can, after the first year or so, just watch what's going on and leave it to itself significantly. You may want to go in and move. There's some plants that I like, some of the ones I showed you earlier, like some of the goldenrods, for example, or the common milkweed. Those guys will start to take over, and you can let them do that, and they'll kind of duke it out, and that's interesting too. But you may need to do a little bit of management as well. You will need to do a little bit of management. It's not just set it and forget it. Yeah.
What's a Chelsea chop?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Chelsea chop is the gardener's term for, so the Chelsea Flower Show happens in England every May. Yeah. And the idea is that if you go out and do the Chelsea chop, which is to cut back your plants, many of your perennials, by a third or a half at around the time of the Chelsea Flower Show, they call it the Chelsea chop, what that will do will mean that a lot of your plants that grow really tall won't grow as tall, so they won't be as floppy. Will also, if you do that chop, they will actually branch out more, and so you'll probably get more flowers and more branches and stems. So if you do the Chelsea chop, I do that with some of my native plants, because then if you do some up front and do the Chelsea chop, they're lower, the ones behind it are a bit higher, and then the lower ones will support the back ones. So again, you don't need to do it, but it is a way of helping to create the effect that you want in your garden. And then just as I'm closing here, this is my garden. That's what that little pad of rocks was. It's my garden or my shed. Just a few more examples of the garden. You see I've got kind of a lawn there. There's not a whole lot of grass in there, in fact, but I do like to have some of that, and it does set off the rest of the plants quite beautifully. Again, mostly natives. There's a few nativars, like this is a cultivar of the New England aster, which is quite beautiful. I might not have put that in if I were doing it now, but it's a beautiful plant. Just some more pictures of the yard. Those are some spring ephemerals, another one of my favorite things, and they're going to be the first things that are going to be popping up in probably just a couple of months. Lots of wildlife. Those are happy green frogs and the common garter snake. Interesting moths, like the primrose moth. And just a few more. We were talking about beauty. Marjorie was saying, well, why do you want to do this? Well, it's beautiful. I think nobody can debate that. The little sort of weird creature in the middle is actually the caterpillar of the giant swallowtail moth, which is not all that common around here, but I get it every year, a few of them.
Wow.
I saw that and I thought it was like from outer space, but yes.
That's a quick question, like going back to like your bigger picture of your property there. How much of it would you say you actively planted, and how much of it would you say you let grow in?
So there's a mix. So, and it's still in progress. Of course, you know what, it's a garden, it's always in progress, isn't it? I would say, so, let's go back here quickly.
Then my backup question after that.
Yeah.
How much effort did you put into suppressing
Weeds?
crabgrass and, yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't really suppress crabgrass. I just, and a lot of these things, if you mow occasionally, and I don't mow those areas that are lower very often, maybe, I don't know, what do you think, like 4 or 5 times a summer? Max, yeah. I get quite lazy. Once you mow, I don't notice if it's crabgrass versus something else. So I'm not saying to put it in there, but I have to say that I just kind of let it go. There's barren strawberry in there. There is, so there's something called creeping Charlie, which is ground ivy, which is considered invasive, but in my opinion, I'm not a scientist, it's invasive in lawns, and since lawns aren't my necessarily priority, then I don't really care, and I cut it back, and in fact, it provides flowers in the spring for some of the earliest pollinators. So, I'm sorry, am I answering your question? What was that last question? Oh yeah, so you can be as fastidious about it as you want to be in a way, as long as it's not something, like Japanese stiltgrass, do you know that? It's an annual that if anybody's been gardening around here for a while, they know about. It's an annual, so at least it dies back, but it spreads like crazy, and I pull that out when I can. But when it's in, and it'll get into your beds and into the edges of the forest, but when it's in the lawn and I cut it back, you wouldn't know the difference. So if I've got a low bit of green, it looks sort of lawnish. Let's call it lawnish, not a lawn. I'm fine with that. So no, I'm not that fastidious about it. And what was your first question? I don't think I answered that.
I'm just curious to know how much you
so
plan versus
this area, what did you say that is, Michael? About half an acre, that area?
Yeah, a little more.
A little more? Okay, so I did not follow my plan, as I mentioned. It was a nice plan, but so what I did, I just took it gradually, and I did really, it's so much fun to observe what comes in on its own. And some of those things you don't want if they're invasive. And then what I would say now is almost all of this is covered with wild violet. But the other plants, so it's blooming. Those pictures that I showed of wild violets at the beginning, that's what it looks like, because at the end of the winter, I cut back the stalks of the plants that have grown up, and I move them out into a pile. And so what that area looks like is it's a ton of wild violets, and then other things start growing up through it. Annual fleabane. I don't know, people hate annual fleabane. It grows everywhere, but it's an annual and comes up early, it blooms the whole year, and the pollinators love it. So I can't break it down exactly because I've kind of blended the things together, but I would say that, you can start out with some seed, some of it will grow, let some of the things that want to come in. Plugs are a really good way to start a meadow like this as opposed to the bigger pots, because they learn to adjust better. They're better at adapting to being planted. I'm not saying not to use bigger plants, because I have to, because I've sometimes wanted something faster. But my garden is a real mix of it, and a lot of it is about just noticing what's happening and then adding and maybe move. I really don't move plants around as much as I should or could.
I was going to say, we have a very large lawn bordered most around by woods.
Mm-hmm.
The woods is trees and 100% barberry. It's all barberry. So I feel as if I let the lawn go, it would be all barberry.
Okay, yeah, so when you say let the lawn go, when I say let the lawn go, I should put an asterisk beside it. And the one thing about a meadow is that a meadow is not going to stay a meadow if it's not managed in some ways, because what will happen is the woody shrubs and trees will come in. So you do have to manage it to keep those things out. So yes, you're surrounded by those guys, and they will probably start to move in. So I would definitely, in the case of the barberry, keep your eyes open for it, and when you can and it starts moving, and pull it, and then mowing it back, eventually they'll sort of die back because they can't, they can't grow. But it's a hard, because when you look at our woods in the fall and all the other leaves have fallen, all you can see are these beautiful colors, but it's burning bush and barberry. So yes, I'm not suggesting that you just leave it be. Management, and you need to adapt your management style and the intensity of it to your particular environment. So remember, all these rules of thumb are things to keep in mind. I'm not suggesting you have to do them all, but keep them in mind, and maybe they'll also help get you to rethink a little bit some of the things that you're doing. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of gardening that we do is kind of make work. I don't mean all of it. There's a lot of things that we do that I think if we didn't do, we'd actually benefit from, and it would be less work. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for coming, and if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was fun.
Thank you, everyone.